Today I want to talk about a camera that is kind of cool and I think you guys might be interested in looking at. If you do any type of action filming or action camera recording, or if you even do something like just walking around on the street vlogging and you don't want the big rigs and the microphones, there might be a camera that's perfect. It's the Sony FDR X3000. So I know it's not like anything new and exciting. It's been out for a while, and there's the GoPro Hero 6, the GoPro 5, there's the Yi Action Cam, the Yi 4K Cam, and then there's a couple other brands that I'm sure I'm missing. But the Sony FDR X3000, I landed on this one and I paid as much as I would have paid for cameras that even have more options. If you see me looking back and forth right now, I'm actually looking at two cameras. I'm recording on the Canon camera, but now you're seeing the Sony camera. Now the Sony camera has a couple of settings. You can do wide, you can do medium, and you can do narrow. I like the medium setting for the walk around, the vlogging, and some of the other things that you might do with this camera. But when I go fishing and strap it onto my chest or my hat, I'll do the wide angle so you see more of what it is that I'm doing. And the narrow is actually closing in more on my face, which I don't really like that one as much. The stabilization on this camera, and I'll give you a walk around in my house in a minute, is just unbeatable. It's optical stabilization, which means it's not shifting pixels on a sensor. This thing's actually stabilizing the sensor. It's second to none. You know what? I have a camcorder, and I'll throw the camcorder on a tripod on my truck, and I'll drive down the road, and that camcorder will have the jitters. But I'll put this camera on the dash of my truck and drive around, and it's like it's not even moving. It's really freaky, actually. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about the camera, go through some of the different features that it has. But before I do that, let me just show you the narrow, medium, and wide. This is the medium mode for the Sony camera. We are in medium. This is the angle of view that you would have if you were medium, and this camera is about 16 to 18 inches away from my face. Now I'm going to pick up the camera and switch into wide mode. Now this is the Sony FDR X3000 filming in wide mode. And just to give you a sample, the other thing I like about this camera that I didn't mention earlier is the microphone is actually quite good. Usually on these action cams, the mics suffer quite a bit. And I was all worried about getting microphones and lavalier mics and everything for this camera. The only thing it doesn't do well in is wind, but I don't think any of them do very well in the wind. But this microphone setup on this camera sounds good. Let me give you a sample. This is the microphone on the Sony FDR X3000 at 18 inches away from my face indoors. No adjustments. I think it sounds pretty good. It definitely works for vlogging and walking around. Let me show you the narrow mode. Now this is the narrow mode for the Sony FDR X3000. It's about 18 inches away from my face. So you can see that it's closed in quite a bit closer to my face, and the field of view is different. So I would say if you're going to do vlogging and walk around and hold this thing at arm's length, I like the wide mode okay, but I like the medium mode best. The narrow mode probably not as much as the other two. Plus, I feel like I lose a little bit of video resolution when I'm in narrow mode versus the medium mode seems really sharp and crisp. Anyway, that's pretty much it for the audio and the field of view test. So let's go ahead and let's test this thing out handheld walking around the house, and you can see what I mean by the stabilization. So now you're seeing the Sony straight up handheld at about the same 16 to 18 inches away from my face, and I'm walking around with this camera handheld, literally. So let me walk you over to the bathroom and show you what I'm doing with the camera. Excuse my messy house if there's any mess around here. So this is it. I have a little tiny tripod underneath. I have the camera pointing at the mirror, and you can see I'm not being super steady with what I'm doing here. But as I walk around, you can see that this thing stabilizes the image fairly well. And so I really like this, especially with the microphones facing my face, and it enables you to walk around, not fatigue your arm, not get tired, and you still have a pretty decent image for vlogging. So this camera really fits the bill for a lot of things. So here's a closer look at the Sony FDR X3000. This is the side panel of the camera. So it has a one-touch auto record. So when you hit the record button, you'll see that it'll automatically start recording when you hit the button with one touch. That's really nice when this thing's mounted on your hat or on your chest and you can't really see the controls. And then you just push again and it stops, and then you push and hold the back button, and that's your power button. So pretty simple controls. It's a little fiddly sometimes when you're trying to do the menu. So when you turn this on, in order to get to menu, you have to hit the menu button here, and then you can cycle through the different settings, but it's pretty self-explanatory. And if you've messed with these types of cameras before, especially if you had a GoPro Hero 3 back in the day, it kind of all makes sense. It has a really nice lens cover. Let me pop it off here. So this is the lens that comes with the camera. It was a little pronounced of the front, so I was afraid of hitting it on something. So what I did was I put this protective cover on it, and it gives it a little bit of glare resistance, and it definitely protects it. You can see up here, or no, over here. I've already dropped it once and I saved it. If you remember back when Sony first started coming out with some of their waterproof or weatherproof phones, they've got the same type of gasket material in here. This body and this is not waterproof, meaning you couldn't jump in a lake or a river and go swimming with this cam the way it sits. But I do have a waterproof housing for it. I rarely ever use it because this is splash resistant as it sits. So going out with my hat, going out in the rain, I don't sweat it too much. If it starts to pour, then I'll stick it in my pocket. But more or less, I just use it as is. Now on the back panel, you do have some connectors. You've got, hold on here. You've got, I think, an audio or AV out port. You've got a USB connector, and you've got a mic input. Sadly, the mic input for me does not work. Anything I've ever plugged into it was either too soft or way, way too loud. So I wish they'd do a firmware update and make this to where you could plug in like a Rode mic or a lav mic or something and it would work better. The only mic that I've been able to work on this camera effectively is the Rode Video Pro and at -10 dB. Front two mics, they really do a great job of picking up sound. So when it's mounted on my chest or on my hat, the proximity is almost perfect. The only bummer is when it gets windy, it's not as good. And I'll have to break out like the Zoom H1 with a lavalier mic with a dead cat. But this thing does a great job. If you really can get away with not using any lavalier, the audio is quite acceptable right off of the camera, which I haven't found to be the case in any cameras. My Hero 3 is decent. The Hero 5 and 6 are okay, but I really think this is one of the best. If you take all of the attributes that this camera has, the stabilization, the medium view, and I haven't even talked about 4K. By the way, this is a 4K cam, and the 4K is brilliant. It looks great, but I see the battery life tank a little bit when you use 4K when you're out in the field. For some reason, the 1080p battery life is almost 50 to 70% more, it seems like. It just lasts a lot longer. I guess writing 4K video requires more battery. This thing has excellent 4K, and other than zooming in or cropping a shot, I don't have a lot of need for 4K, to be honest. And the 60 frames a second at 1080p is the best mix for me as far as clarity and being able to do some slow motion. The 4K, unfortunately, is not available in 60p, but it looks awesome. I just don't really care about 4K a whole lot. Most of the things I do on YouTube are 1080p. The 1080p resolution at 60 frames is good enough, and I'm able to do some slow motion with that, so I'm happy with that setting. But that said, I just wanted to do a quick show and tell on the Sony FDR X3000. I'm sure there's more testing out there. I know iPhonedo guy, he did a really good test with a bunch of different cams. I didn't really care to compare and contrast everything. I just wanted to tell you I've been using this thing for about 8 months now, and it's awesome. This cam is worth every penny. It's a little bit more camcorder in the position and the way that it's geared. It's not flat and wide like a GoPro, which I kind of like actually. It kind of gives me an idea of where I'm pointing it, and it enables me not to have rotation and movement in my shot. So it's definitely one you want to look at, and it's a little bit more expensive, but Sony makes excellent products, and I think the image quality is top notch. Anyway, thanks for joining me, guys. Thanks for watching the video, and look into the Sony. I'll link it below for Amazon and some other stuff and gear that I use. Please feel free to take a look and ask questions for anything that I didn't answer today.